Good evening and welcome to This Week in Northern California. I'm Belva Davis. Tonight we focus on politics in the new year. Joining me on our news panel are Rachel Gordon, City Hall reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle; Paul Rogers, environment writer for the San Jose Mercury News; and Scott Shafer, host of the California Report on KQED Public Radio. Well, Scott Shafer, this week Jerry Brown was sworn in as governor of the state, and he seemed to have lots of good ideas. What direction do you think he's going to take the state?
A very different direction than Arnold Schwarzenegger, both in terms of style and tone and substance. And that became very clear. You know, Arnold was the big Hollywood action star with the big entourage and the Klieg lights. Jerry Brown is stripped down. He walks to work. He goes across the hall to meet with legislators. He walked across a few streets to go meet with some county officials this week to talk about realignment and the budget. And so he's much less imperial than Arnold, and very much hands-on. If you think about it, Jerry Brown has been in public life for his entire life. And it'd be hard to imagine a meeting that he's in where he doesn't know more about public policy and issues than everyone else in that room, especially with term limits these days. So it's going to be, I think, very hands-on, very substantive, and a little bit unpredictable. You know, on Friday he announced some serious cuts. He closed 3 field offices in Fresno, Riverside, San Diego, all counties he lost, by the way, in the election. He closed the office of First Lady. He's not going to have an education advisor. So he's going to be more of the person in charge. There's going to be fewer people around him, fewer bureaucrats kind of filtering the information that he gets, and so I think it's going to be very interesting.
I just have to talk about one thing. You said he closed the office of First Lady, but he did appoint his wife special counsel.
He did, and she is a very powerful, influential person. She was essentially in charge of the campaign. She was the gatekeeper. Ann Gust Brown is her name. She's a former attorney with the Gap. And by all accounts, she is going to be the go-to person, essentially the chief of staff in the governor's office, but she won't be paid. And she probably won't have a whole lot of staff now that they've closed that office. But she will be in, I think, on most important decisions and policy discussions.
Scott, let me ask you about the Republicans in the equation of Jerry Brown. I mean, he did one thing that Republicans have been demanding, that's shrinking the size of government. I mean, he did it right off the bat. But he's also going to be demanding of them that they have to look at some new revenue sources and taxes. And we heard coming right out of the gate on the day he was sworn into office, if he wants us to raise taxes, he better think twice. Do you think, though, just with his demeanor, his style, he's saying, look, I'll give you this if you give me that there might be room for negotiation?
Well, it depends what this and that are. You know, I mean, that's always the devil's in the details. But yeah, they're going to want something. It's unclear whether or not he needs any Republican votes to get the things on the ballot. He's going to be in June asking voters to extend some taxes that are scheduled to be rolled back. Income tax, sales tax, vehicle license fee, those kinds of things. So sure, the Republicans are going to want something, but you know, it's also, Jerry Brown is first time around, and now as well, you're seeing he's very frugal. He's not someone who's going to be throwing money at problems. Of course, there is no money, but I don't think he's going to have any problem with rolling back demanding that unions roll back pensions and benefits and all kinds of things. So,
well,
you know,
that may be the problem, though, right? This is a Democratic state. Every constitutional office holder is Democratic. They voted overwhelmingly for Brown. He beat Meg Whitman by 13%. And the legislature is dominated by Democrats. But he has a $28 billion deficit that he's going to try to cut. And that represents 1/3 of the state's general fund. So he's going to have to do massive cuts to programs that Democrats hold dear. Schools, closing state parks, all the things that Arnold tried to do. And if he's going to have to get any Republican votes to put these tax increases on the ballot in a special election in June, they're going to demand a large pound of flesh, not only pension reform, maybe all kinds of other things, charter schools, privatization of a lot of government jobs. What's he going to do if his left says no, and then can he even get any taxes past the voters right now? Well, this just sounds really difficult.
Yeah, as far as the taxes go, I mean, in the last election, voters rejected an $18 surcharge on the car tax to pay for state parks. I think one of the most important things Jerry Brown has to do in the coming months, and he has to do it by the time the special election happens, is to rebuild trust. I think voters are so disenchanted with Sacramento. I don't think they believe that things legislators say they're going to do with money, whether it's the car tax or gas tax, that they're going to do it. So I think he needs to rebuild that credibility so that when he goes to the voters in June, they have faith that what he's telling them is actually going to happen.
Does Jerry Brown have sacred cows? Are there some things that he says, absolutely, we will not touch? The prisons, the schools, the parks, whatever the initiatives might be? Or do you think he's open to looking at remaking everything in the state?
We don't know that yet. I think we'll know more on Monday. He's going to be releasing his budget, which of course will be the blueprint for everything that's going to happen in the coming year. He doesn't seem like a sacred cow kind of guy. I mean, we know that he cares deeply about the environment, and he's shown that this week with some of the appointments he made, as former Assemblyman John Laird to head up the Resources Board and keeping Mary Nichols on the California Air Resources Board. So we don't know yet, but it's not. I don't think we're in the kind of climate where you can have sacred cows. Everything's going to be on the table. Certainly prisons. I mean, the three biggest parts of the budget are education, prisons, and health and social services. All those things have to be up for discussion.
Well, you're ending talking about some of the people that he's bringing into government. We're going to move now to the man who is just moving out of government, but he too brought some people into government. We're talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger, the outgoing governor. Part of his final act.
And that was one of his more controversial acts of the 7 years he spent in office. In his final hours as governor, Governor Schwarzenegger issued a number of pardons and commutations. And one of them that really has drawn a lot of controversy was he reduced the sentence of a 21-year-old named Esteban Nunez. And Mr. Nunez stabbed a man from San Diego in the stomach in a fight 2 years ago. He pled guilty to attempted manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 16 years in prison. The governor commuted his sentence to 7 years, and it turns out that Mr. Nunez is the son of former Assembly Speaker Fabian Nunez, who was the author of AB 32, the global warming bill, which was Arnold's signature event. And a lot of people on the right and left said, how many other 21-year-olds who stabbed somebody in the stomach and then hid the evidence would Governor Schwarzenegger have pardoned?
Isn't there a little confusion about that? Didn't someone die? And
he was with another guy.
Yeah,
and the other guy,
not the one who killed the person.
Well, the guy who he stabbed didn't die. Another guy was stabbed and died, and that guy was sentenced to even more. But they both went and tried to hide the evidence. So that was very controversial, and that's actually staining his legacy the same way that Bill Clinton's pardons, like financier Mark Rich and people like that, was a stain on the end of his term.
Let me ask you, I mean, you say it's like, and it just so happens it was the son of this, it's
right.
like, does that surprise anyone? That's their ability to do as a as an office holder.
That's what critics are saying is the problem, that Arnold came into office saying he was going to clean up Sacramento. He was going to blow up the boxes, stop this crazy deficit spending, bring common sense, and clean up the place. And he's leaving doing the same sort of cynical act that undercuts people's faith in politicians, the critics are saying. Now, in terms of his legacy, which a lot of people have been talking about this week, you can sort of sum it up, I think, in one sentence, which is green laws and red ink. Arnold will be known for the next 100 years in California as the governor who got California on track ahead of the rest of the United States to reduce greenhouse gases. He had landmark ocean policies to preserve fisheries. He did the Million Solar Roofs initiative, which has expanded solar all over the place by offering people to pay a third of the cost of solar. A lot of things like that, but he never could fix the budget.
I would add to that political reform, and it's yet to be seen how that plays out, but he pushed very hard for the open primaries, which he says and others who support the open primaries will lead to more moderate candidates and members of the legislature. And then the Citizens Commission. Redistricting.
Absolutely.
I mean, he really pushed for that, and they're about to begin their work drawing now the congressional lines have been added to that as well as the state legislative line. So, that's something that is yet to play out, but I think he can either take credit or maybe blame depending on how it works out.
Well, and in a lot of ways, if you think about it, he was positioned as the perfect California politician. He was somebody who came in, at least at the beginning, without a lot of allegiance to Sacramento, without a lot of history up there. He came in as an outsider. He was someone who was moderate on social issues, pro-environment, and he said conservative on the budget, which is where most voters are in the polls. But he chickened out, frankly, in his first year on the budget. Gray Davis handed him a $10 billion deficit. Arnold left office with a $28 billion deficit. Arnold left office with the 23% approval rating. Gray Davis left office recalled with the 22%, the same. And the question is, why didn't Arnold, that historians will ask, why didn't Arnold fix the budget in the first year? He had a higher approval rating in his first year than Ronald Reagan and Pat Brown when they were governors at any time in their term. He did not use that political capital. The Democrats were afraid of him. They gave him what he wanted at first. They gave him workman's comp reform. He took away driver's licenses for illegal immigrants that Davis had given. And then instead of making the hard cuts and raising taxes and fixing the budget, what he did, he put it all on the credit card with that $15 billion bond.
The Democrats were afraid of him, but the Republicans didn't like him. I mean,
Well,
he was
that's
really
right.
in a no-win situation.
That's
He came in
exactly
as a
right.
moderate Republican.
Yep.
In California, and we see that doesn't work too well if you want to get something done.
He did not build coalitions with Republicans well or Democrats, and in the end, Republicans liked him less.
Is it possible for anyone to build coalitions with,
that's a great
with
question.
a Republican block of votes that are solid as a piece of ice?
Well, for much of Arnold's, well, for all of Arnold's tenure, you needed 2/3 to pass a budget. Now, you don't need 2/3 anymore to pass a budget. You still need it to raise taxes. So one thing that you could say about Schwarzenegger's tenure is that he basically tried everything. As one commentator, Joe Matthews, had said, he was a heroic failure. That he raised taxes in 2009, he lowered taxes. He raised spending, he lowered spending. He tried everything, and in the end, his legacy might be that he proved that Sacramento is broken.
You know, one thing he did do is he appointed an awful lot of Democrats to positions, including judges. I mean,
Half as many as Republicans.
And
the same number. They split 50-50.
He did, and you know, and you're talking about the difference with Jerry Brown, who all of his appointments so far, at least, have been Democrats. But well, it does beg the question: what did all that bipartisanship get him?
In the end, if you don't have any friends on either side, then you're at 23%.
Well, in San Francisco, they don't wear labels, but it has been very difficult for the ruling class to get along in the city, down to the fact that the appointment of an interim mayor has had great drama.
It has been not just great drama, but fun drama as well, Belva. But it looks like on late Friday that they're closer to getting an interim mayor in San Francisco. Now, Mayor Gavin Newsom was elected lieutenant governor in November. He was supposed to be sworn in this past Monday. He said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to delay my swearing in until the new board of supervisors with 4 new members out of 11, a little more moderate than the current board, is in place. They're sworn in Saturday. He wants them to pick the interim mayor, not the current board. But the current board went, you know what, we're going to try to do it anyway. And on Friday, they voted 10-1 to appoint City Administrator Ed Lee. Now, if Ed Lee gets this final vote on Tuesday, when the new board will be voting on it, he's going to be the first Chinese-American mayor in San Francisco, historic, as we've just seen in Oakland with Quan. Now, earlier in the week, it was a huge fight. Who was going to get the board's endorsement on this? It came down to Sheriff Michael Hennessy and then City Administrator Ed Lee. Now, Hennessy kind of had the more left in San Francisco support, the progressive bloc. Ed Lee had Gavin Newsom, former Mayor Willie Brown, and the moderate bloc on the board. He had their support, but we can't ignore who Ed Lee is. He was a civil rights attorney before he came into city government about 21 years ago.
Progressives saw this as a great opportunity to put someone in there who was progressive, someone who could possibly win in November. And I just wonder they didn't acquit themselves particularly well. There was a lot of name calling, and Chris Daley in particular kind of stormed out of the board meeting and threatening people. And I just wondered, does that have any long-lasting impact on voters in the sense that they got a chance to see how progressives would perhaps govern if they had more responsibility? Or is that just an isolated thing?
No, I mean, there's a
matter?
tremendous amount of infighting in progressives. A lot of them want to vie to be the kingmaker, the top person in office. They haven't been able to settle on one. We saw it when Gavin Newsom ran for mayor for his second term. The progressives couldn't really rally around one candidate to challenge him. Matt Gonzalez, 4 years before that, came in at the last minute to challenge Gavin Newsom. The board has been split with a slight progressive majority. We might see that shift a little bit. Board of Supervisors President David Chu, not to get too insider in this, he came in as a progressive in city government, and now he seems that he might be going a little bit more towards the center. And his vote for for Ed Lee this week show that he's willing to say to his progressive brethren, you know what, I'm willing to at least look the other way.
To what extent do you think you can give Newsom credit or blame for bringing city politics more to the middle? I mean, he ran as more of a moderate himself. He's done some things that are also, made liberals happy. But, do you think that how much of it is because of the influence he's had?
Well, it's been some, but you have to look that in San Francisco in the last 19 years, there's actually been moderate mayors, starting with Frank Jordan, the former police chief, who was probably the most conservative of the moderates, and then 8 years of Willie Brown. And anywhere else in the country would go, are you joking, saying that Willie Brown's a moderate? But he's very pro-development, pro-business in San Francisco. And then Gavin Newsom coming in that way, you get to say, are you crazy? He's pro-gay marriage, universal health care. He wants to do Tide Power. You can go down the list. What are you talking about? So I don't think it was just Gavin Newsom to do that. I think for a citywide office that San Franciscans have said, at least for the past almost 2 decades, we kind of want a moderate in that seat. Board of Supervisors, have your way, do what you want.
We're going to get back to the mayor, but we should talk about Kamala Harris, who made history too this week.
So Kamala Harris was the district attorney of San Francisco, who was just sworn in as the state's attorney general, the first Southeast Asian, African-American woman in that job. The question is, good for her. We know that she's going to be the new state AG, but who's going to replace her in San Francisco? The clock's ticking on that one. Gavin Newsom says he wants to make the pick. The mayor gets to do that. He still is mayor of San Francisco. He's not saying who it will be at this point. He has a short list, and sometimes that short list has been shifting, but we think by Saturday, possibly Sunday, we might have the answer to that question.
Does it strike you as odd that it's such a it seems to be a very difficult spot for him to fill? It's a prominent job. You could certainly, as Kamala Harris did, parlay it into something else, run for mayor, whatever. And yet David Chu said he didn't want the job. There was a lot of talk about him maybe moving over there. But what do you make of that?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. The job is actually going to be before voters like the mayor for a 4-year term in November. So they have to weigh, do you want a placeholder? Like Newsom was insistent to have a, quote, placeholder in place for the mayor's job, saying, I want to put someone in there who's not going to run in November. He might be looking for a similar thing in November for the district attorney's position as well. I think there are so many people who want that job. What political capital could he gain by picking one over another?
And just a few words as we close about Ed Lee. What kind of guy is he?
He's a fix-it man in San Francisco a lot of ways. What's a city administrator? Well, let's just go a little bit. He's been the city purchaser over his career. He's been a head of the whistleblower program, civil rights attorney, head of public works, fills potholes. He's a person that a lot of people send this stuff to. He doesn't like making a lot of controversy, but he's known to kind of reach out across all factions of San Francisco and say, okay, here's a problem. Let's see what we can get to solve it.
Well, my thanks to all of you. All of the stories interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us tonight. Well, in a moment, a discussion with Norman Solomon on the future of the progressive movement and the new Congress in Washington.